Hi, everyone. How are you? My name is Bhaskar Sunkara. I'm the editor and publisher of Jacobin. And at some point in 2020, I was once a frequent host and guest on this channel, but I haven't been lately. For those speculating, Kale has not launched a coup. He has not locked me out of the office. I found my way in. I've just been working on a few projects. We have a new issue coming up on the ruling class, which should be out sometime in April, and I've been working on two book projects. One with my good friend and frequent Jacobin guest Ben Burgess, as well as Mike Beggs on market socialism and kind of certain debates, the economics of a feasible socialism, part two, kind of. And another project I've been working on, which is a history of the Grenadian Revolution. So, in case you haven't noticed, in case those two examples aren't enough, I've been trying very hard to work very hard at making absolutely no money ever, because those are not very commercially viable projects, but they should be forthcoming. I believe both. Hopefully from Verso Books, under contract from one of them. Hopefully, this video will serve as pressure for Verso to pull the trigger on the other. But I believe they will both be coming out from Verso at some point in 2022. So I've been busy with that, and obviously Kale and Jen and everyone else has been doing a really great job with the channel. I just was catching up the last few days. So anyway, I'm thrilled that everyone's joining us, and today we have a very exciting program. The title card that I came up with, Race and Class at Smith, doesn't really quite capture it. Really, I think the proper title for this talk is Covering the Culture War, because I am joined today by Michael Powell, who's a national reporter for the New York Times, covering issues around free speech and expression and stories capturing intellectual and campus debate. I was telling Michael before that I knew him as the sports guy because I had encountered a lot of his other writing before 2020, including the book Canyon Dreams, which is just a really fantastic piece of writing about a Navajo high school basketball. And it you can kind of see, obviously, a lot of the important issues of identity, of covering marginalized people, but a lot of it was just classic, great, hit the notes of sports journalism, which is to me, I don't really read fiction that often, so that's what I read to kind of get that part of my brain going. So thank you for joining us, Michael.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, and what really did inspire me to have Michael on was a recent piece that he wrote about a battle at Smith College. Smith College has been getting a lot of attention lately for basically being a very hot part of this Cold War that's been going on in the culture war. So you're seeing accusations of racism and kind of other attempts to stamp out perceived or real biases by the administration, pressure from students. You're also seeing some workers who've been complaining they've been caught in the crossfire. There is a slightly more complicated case of Jody Shaw, who recently, a Smith employee who recently resigned from Smith, claiming that the school was creating a racially hostile environment, that were kind of pushing her towards trainings and other things she found objectionable. It's a slightly more complicated case, but the story that Michael wrote centers around the case of a student who in 2018 accused the administration of essentially racially profiling her while she was trying to eat her lunch. I mean, that was what the headline from the ACLU said at the time. That seemed like a very straightforward, clear-cut story. I know I like most like-minded people on the left were obviously outraged when we saw that, and we know how much racial animus and bigotry there still is in the United States. The story got a little bit complicated a few Months later, though, when more details emerged, it turns out that a couple of the workers who initially got a lot of attention because they were denounced by the student weren't actually really that involved in the situation. In one case, not at all. It turned out that at least a finding from a third party a law firm said that they couldn't determine. They didn't think there was bias involved. It really did impact the lives of some of the workers involved, and it got us into, I think, a complicated position because Smith University, especially in recent years, and other universities around the country have been pushing lots of trainings around racial sensitivity, around unconscious bias, and other things. And one, the efficacy of those trainings are not very, very clear. It's not clear that they actually reduce bias. And second of all, a lot of incidents like this, it's not hard to determine whether there's actually bias involved. And third of all, it has shifted a lot of the conversation around anti-racism to these incidences of biases, to representation, when I think most of us, especially people who watch a Jacobin YouTube video, would know that inequality in this country really has deep material roots. It impacts millions and millions of people's lives negatively, Black Americans most of all. But this discussion and this debate, I think, tends to exclude these millions of people and the material issues that they're dealing with. So all that is to set up our guest. So Michael, I guess I'm wondering whether you could start by maybe discussing how you first came to journalism and how you made this well, first of all, how you came to journalism, because I know you have a very interesting work background. You were a taxi driver, you were a doorman, you were a tenant organizer. So how did you land in journalism to begin with?
Sure. I mean, I grew up in New York, and my father was a sort of itinerant character actor. So I mean, very much of a type at that point in the city. And after getting out of State University, I went out to Brooklyn, worked as you say as a cab driver, as a doorman, and then started doing tenant organizing in East Flatbush for a few years. That's a largely West Indian neighborhood, also some American Blacks, Haitians, and it was one of these neighborhoods that had changed very quickly from white, kind of lower middle class, Jewish, Italian, Irish to African American and West Indian, of a very similar, actually, class nature. I mean, that was one of the things that was kind of striking. In many respects now, today, that neighborhood is the same economically that it was probably 50, 60 years ago. Anyway, I did that for a few years. I also was writing. I wanted to go into journalism, I like to say, for two reasons. I wanted to change the world and I wanted to write, and I succeeded at one of those. So I worked for a series of small papers in Brooklyn and then out of the city, and there we go.
And I guess it seems like today, especially being a white journalist, it's kind of it's thorny territory to get into these debates about identity that are going on. But you explicitly made the decision to go from covering the sports beat to covering these issues. So I wanted to know what drove you to do that insane act.
Good question. Right, a question for my therapist, maybe. Look, I'd worked for New York Newsday in the day. I'd worked for the Washington Post. I've covered poverty. I've covered neighborhoods. And, in addition to national politics, presidential politics, the economy, all sorts of things. And I kind of, as much as I loved, and I did, sports, and at the times you can kind of cover it both sort of the games and, if you will, the sort of social and economic implications at the same time, I felt like a yearning to kind of get back into it. Just felt such a polarized and fraught time nationally, and I was kind of anxious to take it head on. And I talked with the woman who became is now my editor, and we both kind of came up with this. And I guess, yeah, I'm a white guy. I plead guilty. But I think, that to a certain extent, I've spent an enormous amount of my career covering issues of poverty, of race, of a lot of other things. Doesn't I would never argue that this gives me some, special dispensation. But it did leave me with a great interest in those issues, going back all the way to my organizing days. And it seemed a good time to kind of bring an eye towards some of those intellectual issues, some of the issues of uh, race and identity and these sort of things, and class, and try to make sense of those. So yeah, I mean, and right now, my wife says, it's like I'm in a transit authority train yard running around putting my hands on third rails. So there you go.
Yeah, well, I do think that being a working class New Yorker, having this experience with these jobs and these neighborhoods, yes, it doesn't give you maybe authoritative view of every single aspect of human life, or race or otherwise, because nothing does. And obviously, a good journalist, just like a good organizer, just asks lots and lots of questions, which is a good model, I think, for all of us on the left. But I think it does give a certain insight into
I hope so.
the commonalities of experiences,
Yeah.
too, for working people, regardless of their background. Again, one reason why I object to kind of the monolith people of color, because it encompasses everything in human life, because it's the quite large majority of humanity.
Yeah, it's a phrase I really have resisted using. I mean, it just feels to me like, we always, I mean, look, we always do a certain amount of generalization, right? You talk about a Latino. I mean, a Latino is potentially an enormous umbrella. But once you get to people of color, as you say, now we're at about, whatever, 2/3 of the world. And that just seems not to tell you a whole lot.
So this Smith story, in particular, I'm wondering. So while I was waiting for people to log on, and when I was filibustering for a couple of minutes, I gave a crude introduction to it. But I'm wondering if I missed something, or if you could explain basically what happened in a bit more fine grained detail.
Sure. I mean, there was this Black student of Malian background. I think her parents were immigrants. She was a sophomore at Smith, which is, very liberal, social justice oriented school. Lots of concern about that, kind of woven into the curriculum. Lots of activism on campus, particularly right now around identity. And she was working during the summer as a teaching assistant. Takes a and I Well, anyway, I'll finish and then I'll add my caveat. She takes a meal. In normal times, you can go to any number of cafeterias on campus. She goes to a cafeteria that is normally open to students, is normally in a dormitory. In this case, it had been set aside for a summer camp. She was supposed to use a different cafeteria. Again, this is not like felony stuff. I mean, this is just, but the fact is, she was in this dormitory. I mean, in this cafeteria, she gets the food. She's cautioned by one of the workers that, you're not supposed to be here, but whatever, go ahead, get your meal. She then takes it kind of through some doors, goes to a dormitory that is closed for the summer, and eats. I mean, she's not doing anything, nothing at all. I mean, she's eating, she's scrolling through her her phone, and she's somewhat obscured from view and the rest from the cafeteria. But however, it is one of these dorms that's supposed to be closed. So a janitor, an older janitor, has worked at the school for about 35 years, sees someone in there, does not know who it is. They've been told, because of the summer camp, where everybody working around the summer camp is supposed to have these police checks to make sure they don't have any criminal background. They've all been told, all the workers, keep an eye out, make sure, because it's the summertime. People can wander into the schools. This is a small, Northampton's a small city. It's just so he sees somebody in there, doesn't know even male or female, and he knows that they've been told, when in doubt, call security. Security is unarmed, by the way, but so he calls security, and the further advice is, be careful, don't feel you have to confront people. Just let our folks do it. They're trained. Now, from her perspective, she's in there. She looks up at some point, and a campus security officer is coming in to talk to her, a white officer. They actually have not even fairly, they have a polite conversation, because she actually recorded it. So you can hear that. She writes, the guy's very friendly. He recognizes that she's a student, apologizes for bothering her. I believe that she actually stays sitting where she's sitting, even though technically it's off limits. And she that night takes to Facebook and says that she's been profiled, and that it's a case of eating while black, and there are a number of these cases nationally. She says that racist workers had fingered her, singled her out because she was a black, and we're kind of, from the point of view of the university, we're off to the races. This blows up. I mean, literally the next day, there's starting to be press coverage. The university jumps in within 36 hours. The college president is making this, passionate, effusive apology to the student. They've put the janitor, who again has had 35 years there, on leave, without ever talking with him or the cafeteria workers, and starts to become it gets picked up by My Place, by the Times, by the Globe, by CNN, CBS. I mean, it becomes one of those seminal, kind of events. It's the summertime too. It's quieter, and it really gets picked up. And a few weeks later, she then posts something else on Facebook and puts the face of a cafeteria worker who had worked, long-time worker at the school, and of a janitor, actually not the janitor that actually made the call, and said, essentially, these are the two, and she put their face, the names, I believe, of both of them, and the email of the cafeteria worker for sure. And she said, these are the racists who basically were involved in profiling me. And it's a pretty angry thread. Things really blow up then. There's yet more apologies. The cafeteria worker, first place, the janitor that she identified wasn't even at the school. I mean, literally was not working at the hour that happened. So she was forced to correct that a few days later. The cafeteria worker, there's no such correction. And the cafeteria worker was later found to have really nothing to do with this. And starts to get really pretty severe blowback. I mean, she starts getting, calls accusing her at home, accusing her of being a racist. She's a local woman. She'd grown up in Northampton, very working class. Her husband is a kind of a part-time mechanic. And it starts to get quite, I think quite psychologically rough. And the students are up in arms. they're referring to her as the racist, and it's off to the races. I mean, from the point of view of the workers.
So what? So first of all, the university administration, it immediately suspends with pay
Yes, with pay.
the gender, right?
Albeit, I think the union had something to do with that. I don't know that the original intent was to do with pay, but yes, with suspended with pay.
So I guess one perspective on why the administration would do this is that they were, zealots in defense of this certain form of anti-racism created in the academia. Maybe cultural Marxism is involved. Whatever else. I think there's a certain narrative like that. But I think in your piece you mentioned that the administration and the president of the university had maybe had some missteps in the past as far as saying what was perceived as racially insensitive things, or just kind of awkward missteps as they tried to adapt to the new environment, and the new discourse, for better or worse, on race and other issues in the last few years.
Right. No, I think that's absolutely right, Bhaskar. I mean, there was this. There was existing already at Smith, as at many, particularly kind of small liberal arts schools, a sort of, if you will, kind of identity-based, anti-bias, anti-racism curriculum that was more and more kind of taking hold. At the same time, the college president, Kathleen McCartney, had several. I mean, by all accounts, she's a well-meaning liberal, leader of this campus. But she had a couple of slips. She had been I guess 3 years earlier, she had been at moderating an alumni event in New York City. It was around the question of, are certain words verboten, the question of Huckleberry Finn and the N-word came up. One of her panelists, who was herself a Wendy Kaminer, who's a well-known member of the ACLU and a writer, said the word. She argued that, look, we're giving it too much. We have to diffuse this word of kind of its poison, and one of the ways of doing that is to not be afraid to use it. So she says the word. There ensues a vigorous discussion on the panel, and McCartney, the president, there's outrage back on the campus from the students. They're saying that, you absolutely should have denounced this analyst, Wendy Kaminer, as soon as she said that word. And it's really quite a ruckus. And she apologizes and apologizes again and apologizes again and said, like she blew it. And I mean, in her words. And then a little bit later, she's issuing ironically, a condemnation of these two grand juries that had let two cops accused of killing black men off, had declined to, the grand juries and declined to indict them. She issues this, stirring statement, denouncing this and talking about this. And at the end of it, I think her last or second to last line is, all lives matter.
Who is her assistant? Who is her assistant? Somebody needs to. I know this is a terrible line for us to say blame a worker, but was no one else looking over her shoulder when she wrote this? Was no one copy editing this?
I don't know. I mean, I will say, you look at that and you think, right. I mean, as I say, everyone needs an editor. She clearly needed an editor. She clearly did not mean it that way. And I mean, the rest of the statement is an absolute, affirmation of kind of, liberal outrage. But so she ends up, again, engaging. I mean, students are outraged. She again is engaged in all kinds of apologies. So this is kind of the predicates, if you will, leading up to this, right? These are her previous 3 years. And and I think it's hard not to see the speed and the urgency with which she and other high members of her administration embraced the student's story as just kind of writ. Like there was, I mean, you read their statements, there's just no doubt something bad happened, and we're going to get to the bottom of it. And, you know, I think arguably a leader of a college would probably be better advised to try to lead students through due process and the importance of, I mean, and that isn't to short the student. By the way, it also to argue this is not, this was not a hoax. I mean, the student viewed it as her reality, right? So in other words, it wasn't like the student decided like to scam anyone. But again, it seems to me that yes, perhaps in a less or perhaps a charged environment complicated it, but a good leader, that's what you do at a school, is you kind of you navigate that and you lead it, and you don't throw workers, which was very much the sense you got in looking at that, kind of under the bus. However much, and whether she intended to or not, I mean, that certainly is how, when you talk, and I talked to quite a few of the people, the kind of more working class people at the university, that's very much how they saw it, and I think arguably with pretty good reason.
So she's trying to get ahead of this situation. She's trying to make sure that that she doesn't issue a statement saying we'll look into it, and look terrible in the process when it comes out 3 months later that the student was a victim of something unambiguously racist or unambiguously inappropriate in some way. But there's also pressure that she's getting before and after from student groups, right? There's statements from student groups, there's protests, there's lockouts. Is there any response that you know from your reporting from either of the two union locals involved? I think they're both SEIU locals, about what's going on. Is there any, I guess, tension? Because when I was doing my own research into the story, one thing that I was looking at is the structure, membership, size of both these union locals. I found in both cases they have total assets. They each have around 100 members, and they have total assets less than 1 year tuition plus room and board at Smith. And I also found that there was a lot of solidarity action when the cafeteria workers in particular were bargaining for a new contract in 2016. So students were doing walkouts. They were doing, there we go. Kale is that quick. He has the Smith Students March for Cafeteria Workers and Immigrants. That's 2016. So these students were presumably people who just had cast a ballot, those of them old enough, in their first presidential election, probably disproportionately for Bernie Sanders in 2016, almost handed him that state. I think he just narrowly lost Massachusetts back then. Thanks for nothing, Elizabeth Warren. But yes, there's these walkouts and solidarity action. Then, in this case, just 2 years later, or 2 years and change later, there's student actions, but is there any acknowledgement of the workers that you're picking up on, or any acknowledgement of the tension that ordinary kind of lives are at stake too, and it's not just a university administration versus student battle?
That's a great question, and no, I did not pick up on that. Now, there's an important sort of reporting caveat, right? Because of COVID. I mean, I went up there, but there's not like a lot of students around, so I couldn't, in a meaningful way, take their temperature. But no, certainly when you go back through and you look, there was a walkout at the convocation and in September when everybody gathers, a walkout in support of the Black student. There were quite a few denunciations of this act, what was seen as a active racism. And in talking with the workers, they said, I mean, I should say, there were individual people who knew them, individual students, as would be true at any college. And they said that, some of those students were, sympathetic or at least still friendly to them. But there was also an awful lot of, the one worker described, being told by many more than one student that she was a racist, and hearing students whisper about her and getting notes given to her accusing her of racism. So no, I think it's fair to say that certainly the high tide in this on campus was very much running, towards the student. I mean, there was not, and certainly the union did not talk about any, any sense of solidarity for the students. Quite the opposite, actually. That a lot of the workers talked of a feeling of alienation from the campus and a worry that if they cross students, if students, complain, they can be gone, quickly, or that they can quickly get in trouble.
There was one line that I liked in your piece. It was something like, let me see if I get in front of it. We used to joke, "Don't let a student report you, because if they do that, you're gone." I should say in this case, the student making the accusation is not, or does not seem to be a rich student. Who's kind of seemed to be a first generation college student or whatever else.
Yes, that's the appearance. I mean, I shouldn't say the appearance. That's my sense. She unfortunately would not. I several times asked for interviews. I talked to her lawyer, who's with the ACLU, but she didn't, talk for the piece.
Is her lawyer a privately employed lawyer who just happens to also work for the ACLU? Is there a lawyer? Sorry, I'm just completely ignoring the question. Or is her lawyer acting in capacity as an ACLU person?
He's a full Massachusetts ACLU lawyer, head of, and I may be butchering the precise name, but essentially their racial rights project. And I believe he's a former prosecutor before that. But no, he's a full-time ACLU attorney.
Is this a project that the ACLU jumped on, or at least engaged in right away in 2018 when the allegations came? Okay, so I guess it's hard to tell at that point whether he's just doing his job, because he has a particular. I don't have your piece in front of me, but he had a howler of a line, especially in the context of describing actually what some of these people not involved with the incident had to go through. But it was hard to tell whether or not that line was just him being good attorney, sticking up for a maybe flimsy case by the person he's representing, which is obviously what one should do when talking to a reporter, or whether it was some sort of deep felt belief. So one thing that I guess is difficult when reporting on these cases and gauging what the student body is thinking is that, at colleges, the students turn over really quickly. So I showed that image before of students in late 2016 protesting. This incident happens in summer 2018. We're now in 2021. So it's not like it's the same people necessarily. So maybe it is difficult to try to track down people who were doing something in 2016, ask them what they thought in 2018, what they were doing in 2021. It's pretty impossible at a 4-year campus. But I do wonder whether maybe the students that you did talk to put what they were doing, their activism or their outrage over that or other things on campus, in the continuum of campus activism as a whole. The kind of campus activism that me and a lot of people were involved with, which is like anti-sweatshop activism, which was a big thing, especially when the left was extremely weak. I was too young for it, but the anti-apartheid struggle and like, again, often when conservatives have a certain version of what goes on as far as campus activism, it just completely doesn't jive with what I actually saw. Was, yes, it was like very particular campus student body quality of life things that might not matter to the wider world, but matter to some students. But it was also solidarity with in our case, like Sodexo workers where I went to school, or these other campaigns. Did they seem was there any putting that action in 2018 and 2019 into that continuum? Did you feel like it was the same left activists who might have been involved in that stuff involved with this too? Was it a different contingent of students? And again, I know you can't. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I did not. I mean, tell you the truth, I did not come across those same students, but that would be right. It'd be like at this point, it'd be almost a fifth-year student. Presuming they'd gotten involved as a freshman in 2016. And I guess I want to be careful because I don't want to seem like I don't want to in any way dismiss the student activists or, seem to condescend to them at all. I do think that we're at a time right now where activism around race and identity, and this isn't just black white, but race and identity is it's a very powerful force, right? Not just on this campus, at many campuses in society, but in many campuses in particular. And I would not want to extrapolate without talking to a lot more students, but I think one could reasonably ask whether right now that trumps, a sense of class, identity and race, perhaps trumping class there on campus. Certainly, I will say that was the sense of the workers that I talked to. I mean, there I was able, because obviously the workers continued to come to the campus, I was able to talk with them about this. And that was their sense. Their sense is that they've kind of, if you will, become, sort of stock figures in a morality play from their point of view. I think it'd be really interesting to go back. You gave me an idea. Go back and try to find some of those activists, because I'm not trying to suggest that makes their activism that is on Smith or any other place fake or phony. It's a passionate time. It's a tense time. It's a polarized time, and certainly the sense is with this particular incident that it was received on the larger campus as much more of a race, kind of race and bias question race and racism question than it was one of, kind of this mix of class and other things.
Yeah, and I think that obviously, even if this particular incident, based on what we know, might have not warranted this particular outrage, when people are angry about something, they often look for proxies. They look for, oh, this incident that I heard about is emblematic of this thing I experienced, or this thing my friend experienced, or whatever else. So I don't mean either to demean the impulses of someone going out to protest something. I certainly don't wait for the final definitive peer-reviewed study on the Trump administration to know that we should be protesting the Trump administration on inauguration day or whatever else. But I want to get to these workers at Smith, and in particular, I'm just wondering if you can, again, painting a broad stroke based on your conversations with them, characterize their worldview, because it seems to me that, based on the quotes in your piece, there was a broadly progressive kind of concern with what one mentioned, money privilege. Again, a striking quote. And I'm wondering whether, as people on both the liberal side of the spectrum and conservative side of the spectrum get very riled up about these issues of racial bias trainings and work places, or critical race theory, or these other questions of what's happening at universities, or the nature of curriculum, whether in fact workers are being torn to one side or the other of this debate, or whether this debate just seems kind of confusing and inconsequential, or again, not confusing in a condescending way,
Sure.
but confusing and irrelevant to their lives.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's not inconsequential, because particularly in the wake of this, many of these workers were, instructed, and told to undergo, kind of racial bias training to join white accountability, what are called by the university white accountability groups. So I think there was a feeling on the part, I know from talking with them, that of the workers, that they were that before there was, because the talk of the training was like came literally within weeks of this event in July of 2018, that before even a report came in, there being, the position is being taken that, well, these white workers, and it is, it's a vastly white area. Northampton is in central western Massachusetts. It's white working class area and then a series of these kind of elite schools, Holyoke, Smith. I mean, there's a bunch of them. And so there's already a certain, and look, town and gown. I mean, those are age old kind of tensions. Tensions are even more so here because you do have this sense of frankly, kind of an orthodoxy being put in place around left liberal or liberal issues, and one of those is race. So a lot of the workers said, like, basically, what the hell, I didn't do anything. And now, in fact, one of the cafeteria workers, and now I'm in a small workshop where I'm being asked about my views on race as a kid growing up and this kind of stuff. And she says, look, I'm a cafeteria worker, and frankly, actually, the funny thing is in fact, she even knew the student. They had worked, the student had worked in the cafeteria, for a job, I mean, during the year for a couple of weeks. But I mean, so she knows some of the kids, or young adults, but she was, I mean, I think there was a real sense that, again, the school had decided, who was at fault here, and then was going to, and put in place all of this training well in advance of having any idea what actually happened.
Yeah, you have to read White Fragility to serve a rich kid food. I could see how in the abstract that would draw a lot of
Right, that
draw some
rubs people
resentment.
really wrong. Right.
But in this case, they're unionized workers. So I'm just wondering, were these mandatory? Like, how did this get past the union? Because obviously, at the faculty level, often these trainings, which I, for the record, think are bad and counterproductive, and at the very best ineffective, and possibly counterproductive. But they're often added. Faculty unions often allow them to happen or even encourage along the institution of these processes. But in this case, it doesn't seem like a cafeteria SEIU local would allow it. So I don't know if I'm sure you don't know the intricacies of the union contract, but were these mandatory or?
Well, yeah, they were. I mean, at least some part of this was absolutely mandatory. Now, I should hesitate, though I don't think it certainly was not the impression of the cafeteria workers, and I talked to more than one, that they had any choice in this matter. And the union was seen as not being terribly um, active on these questions. And it's I'll leave it at that. I mean, they are not, certainly the workers I talked to went through this training, they did not volunteer to do this training.
Yeah, if I had to guess, the union doesn't seem to have direct full-time staff at the local itself. So probably you have a treasurer and secretary, a bunch of people working either for free or on a very small stipend. You have, reps covering many different locals. So yeah, it might be that even if they could have mounted a challenge to have to do it, that requires organizing and that requires putting up a fight. And if they're paid for it anyway, and your boss is asking you to do something, you're on the job, you just kind of grin and and bear it. But
Right. And my understanding, by the way, is that faculty, there was one online bit of training that I am pretty sure was mandatory, but that the rest, the kind of white accountability groups and this sort of thing, that is for the faculty. The union did not agree to make that mandatory. And as a result, it is voluntary. And according to, I talked to quite a few faculty. Faculty attendance these things is a rapidly diminishing number of people.
so in general, not just the Smith story, but these debates about issues happening on campus, to what extent do you think they're resonating more broadly in the public at large? I'm just asking this as a person who thinks about this issue a lot. Obviously, I know you don't have a scientific answer to this, but I sometimes wonder, because my world is basically the media world plus academia, because we publish a journal and we're interfacing a lot with professors and grad students. And obviously, these are two parts of the world, parts of cultural and intellectual production where these issues are paramount and defines a lot of the debates and our mental space for the last 16 months. But I sometimes wonder, and in part it's because I have normie parents who like both Bernie and Biden. That classic. I think there's a lot of them probably in New York City and elsewhere. So yeah, I'm just wondering how wide do you think this is resonating beyond the ivory tower?
It's certainly in Northampton, the sense I got in talking with the workers. And again, the workers are, I shouldn't say uniformly white, but they're a lot, they're certainly majority white. And one of the sense I get there is that this kind of racialized training is rubbing a lot of people raw, and a lot of people know that is, friends and stuff know in the town what's happened to the cafeteria worker who was falsely accused and or mistakenly accused. And it was interesting. One of the male workers said to me, what did he say? He had voted for, he referenced voting for Obama. Now, he didn't say what he did in 2020, but he did talk about, that he had been in the military. That's right. So he said, look, I've served, like I had black buddies. Now, this isn't, I'm not trying to get into these discussions where, I can't be a racist, but he was talking honestly as, a working class guy. And he said, I feel like basically what the hell, I'm a custodian. I had I was career military. I came out, and certainly the distinct impression you got was that this was really rubbing him raw. And I shouldn't, I guess if I had to bet, I'd bet he voted Trump. But I don't know that. I didn't, he had mentioned voting for Obama, and that was it. But I think that certainly, it would seem to me, that's the concern, that you've got these kind of hothouse environments with these, these kind of small, very good liberal arts schools, where it's now kind of one training piled atop another, and more kind of encounter groups, as well as and that the risk is that kind of looks from the outside in a working class part of the state, and a white working class part of the state, as something that's pretty distant from people's concerns.
Well, my big worry as someone on the socialist left is just like, where are the Bernie-crats? We like where what in other words, I think we made a very distinct political current between 2015 and 2020 that was progressive on obviously on social issues, progressive on the fight against oppression, but fundamentally embedded in a working class politics and rhetoric that, even if it couldn't win over a majority of workers in the here and now, at least was meant to be non-alienated. Come sit down with us, talk about Medicare for all. Oh, don't oppose this effort to help more oppressed people because we're all in it together. This kind of Bernie-crat rhetoric, which I do think is a potential future for politics in America. And it just seems like so much of that has been erased. It's hard to believe that it's just been a year since we won in Nevada. And my big worry personally is that if we set it up so that that part of American politics is erased, then if there is a backlash to this overreach from a certain segment of American liberalism, or maybe even American radicals embracing some of this, it'll just go to the right, and it'll just go to the point where I saw Jodi Shaw, the Smith employee who recently resigned, and in her initial writing on her experiences, struck a lot of broadly liberal leftish notes, whatever you think of her case or what she was saying. I think it's a little complicated. Was on Ben Shapiro and on Tucker Carlson covered it, and whatever else. I just worry that we're setting ourselves up for a backlash that doesn't adopt the line of this isn't the right way to address oppression, but rather addresses the line of this is what happens when you talk about any sort of oppression.
Yeah, look, I mean, I cut my journalistic teeth. My first daily job was at the Burlington Free Press when Bernie Sanders was in his, I guess, second or third term as mayor. And and then I went up there again and covered, some of his, I guess, his gubernatorial run. And then I went up there when he ran for Senate. And I mean, look, he was, whatever one wants to say about Bernie, I mean, he absolutely knew how to appeal to basically the kind of workers I was talking to. I mean, those were, potentially those were Bernie Democrats. And, and he was very good at at beating kind of the class drum. And that, was enormously effective. I'll never forget, I have very conservative relatives who I love up in Vermont, and they assured me when Bernie was first elected by, 10 votes as mayor, they said, oh, well, that's a one-off. That's never going to happen again. And of course, he went on and I guess served, 3 or 4 terms. So.
Yeah, and Bernie also overperformed in the northeast kingdom of Vermont, and more conservative parts of the states. He tended to do better, which is a sign that Matt Karp and Jacobin compared that to Warren's record in more conservative parts of Massachusetts, for instance, and found that it was in fact quite the opposite. So if there is a difference, if you want to parse the difference between a certain variety of progressive rhetoric versus the Bernie-crat rhetoric, I think one is less alienating, even if in the short term programmatically they're still fighting for a lot of the same good things. But I think that's a nice place to end it. I really do appreciate your time, Michael. I'm looking forward to the rest of your work. And yeah, for everyone watching, please do check out Michael's work in the New York Times, and also his excellent book. I do highly recommend reading Canyon Dreams, which I think was also made into a show, right?
Yes, it was, and it may, God willing, and inshallah, something will happen. Still could happen. So that's like every writer's dream, right? As you sort of you hold on to these little pipe dreams that it might become something more. So
I know a handful of writers who've gotten the very exciting experience of getting something optioned, but I know of no writers who've actually, everybody has a story of the hair away, the option that should have became something, but yeah, Canyon Dreams is awesome.
I very much agree, and I'm one of those people. Yes.
And I should one plug for the channel is Saturday at 1 p.m. I think that's the next thing we have going on, and our guest is Ross Barkan, who will be talking about New York politics and seeing whether Cuomo can weather this storm. I'm sure that's something Michael also has a lot of thoughts on, and maybe talking about the mayoral race, where it seems like the left is erased. But Michael, I should tell you, by the way, that I did an interview with De Blasio when he was in 5th place for The Nation back in 2014, and in the interview he did with me, he just trashed Dolan and he trashed A-Rod. And it was just like talking freely because I was just joking with him about how I'm an A-Rod apologist, and he's like, "Who else do you like? James Dolan?" And I just said, he ran the Rangers pretty well. And that was all published, including him also saying that he was like a Red Sox fan. And he was just speaking freely. He didn't have a chance. I think at the time I was a Lou man, because I like, kind of corrupt strongmen, but
Right.
that didn't work out. But in any case, thanks, Michael. I look forward to checking out your work. I'm sure there's exciting things in the pipeline. Is there anything you wanna plug?
Uh, no, I think I'll leave it at this. But I do enjoy I enjoy Jacobin. I think you do a very good job with that, and I whether I always agree with it or not, I read it. So it's I think it's a really a good lively journal, and that's impressive in this day and age. So
A truly diplomatic response. After you're done at the New York Times, I will invite you to wave the red flag with us in retirement one day at a DSA rally or something like that. But take care, Michael.
there you go, man. See you.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye.